Wednesday morning, and it looks like we'll keep that fine weather, although some cloud will build and we'll see the odd shower for northern England as well as eastern Scotland, but more widely showery conditions continue for Northern Ireland and western Scotland, where it will be on the cool side, 12 to 14 Celsius here, still the potential for 19, perhaps 20 degrees in the southeast. And then widely fine conditions return from the south during Friday after a spell of rain in the far north, and on Saturday and Sunday it's looking sunnier and much warmer.
Tonight on GB News, at 6 it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dubes & Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning, it's 9:30 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Now I'll be bringing you all the latest from the Queen's speech today, the impact on housing, on the internet, on regulation. We'll also be looking at NATO expansion. Did you know the Prime Minister is in Finland and Sweden today? That and a potential trade war with Europe, all to come on this morning's briefing after your news.
A very good morning to you. It's 9:30. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. Let's give you the day's headlines. The Prime Minister has chaired the first Cabinet Committee to tackle the cost of living crisis amid warnings Britain's on course for a recession later this year. The National Institute of Economic and Social Research says around 250,000 households could become destitute without immediate government action. Millions of renters living in unsafe conditions should have their homes improved under major housing reforms. The Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove announced the new Renters Reform Bill will be extended to nearly 4.5 million households. Well, the plans will help tenants living in damp, unsafe and cold homes and protect them from eviction notices without reason. Boris Johnson's visiting allies Sweden and Finland today as the two countries consider whether to join NATO. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has prompted a reevaluation of security in the Nordic countries. The Russian President Vladimir Putin has threatened to respond if they join the military alliance. Well, Professor Mark Weller told GB News that could antagonise Russia.
It is quite a momentous and risky decision for the rest of Europe for this to happen, because it does sort of tighten the noose a little bit around Russia. this sense that the Russians, that President Putin has had, that he is being surrounded by NATO, although not really true, is now likely to be reinforced.
The former US President Donald Trump could be allowed to rejoin the social media site Twitter. Elon Musk agreed a £34.5 billion takeover bid with the Twitter board last month. In an interview, he hinted that Trump could have his ban reversed after he was removed from the platform in January last year. At the time, Twitter said his account was permanently suspended due to the risk of further incitement of violence following riots in Washington. You're now up to date here on GB News. I'll keep you up to date across the day. Don't go anywhere. Right now, we're back to Tom with the briefing.
A very good morning to you. You're watching The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood. It's 9:33. Well, today, Foreign Secretary Liz Truss is apparently preparing draft legislation that would unilaterally scrap parts of the Northern Ireland Protocol. Well, why is this important? Well, while it wasn't included in the Queen's speech yesterday, last night Truss announced that she's rejecting proposals by the EU to alter the protocol. Proposals that the UK government says would make things worse, not better. Well, UK-EU relations are in freefall today, and indeed with warnings of a trade war. The EU deploying tariffs against the UK if we were to do away with checks between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So, would this trade war actually come about if we were to unilaterally change the protocol? Or is this actually just a bit of fear-mongering? Well, let's talk through these issues now with the DUP's Jim Shannon, who I'm delighted to say can join us on the programme now. Welcome to the programme, Jim. I suppose this is a big step from the government, although we have heard a lot of words about this for quite some time.
Yeah, I think it's been 2 years we've been talking about this and 2 years waiting on it. I suppose you can forgive us, Tom, for being just a wee bit cynical, a wee bit maybe unsure of just what it means. But I had a discussion with Liz Truss just yesterday. It was just a few words in the corridor, but I'd seen her statement in the paper, and she had reassured intending to do something more emphatic, and that has been realised today. Jeffrey Donaldson, our leader here at Westminster, has had meetings with the Prime Minister again to discuss this. We, as a result of the elections last week in Northern Ireland, the party has a mandate, a clear mandate, a mandate not just for the DUP, by the way, but a mandate from all unionists who are all united against the Northern Ireland Protocol. And the numbers of people who voted for unionist parties at the election last week far outnumber those who of a national tradition. So I think Liz Truss and the Prime Minister Boris Johnson recognise now that something must happen, and it must happen for the political system to be reinstated in Northern Ireland in a way that it can work. The Northern Ireland Protocol must go for that to work. Thank you.
Do you buy into these ideas that were the UK to take unilateral action on this, that the EU might take action against the UK, imposing tariffs in the middle of a cost of living crisis?
I think we understand what the battle will entail if it goes that direction. I mean, let's be honest. Where the problem with this lies, for almost a year and a half, there's been discussions with Liz Truss and her department directly with EU officials. The talks were getting nowhere. Lots of flannel, lots of verbal discussions, but no action and no movement from the EU. So after all that time, you can understand the frustration that Liz Truss as a minister and the Prime Minister himself, and we as a party representing the large bulk of unionists in Northern Ireland, see within the Northern Ireland Protocol. So yeah, it has to go for the reasons that it's holding back progress. And will there be a trade war? I can't say if there will or there won't, but I think the Prime Minister and Liz Truss recognise that there's a constitutional issue to answer here. We want to be as British as Edinburgh, as Cardiff, as London, as the Midlands. So for that to happen, then this has to be removed.
Is it to some extent the DUP's position on this, that this is a more constitutional than economic matter, that to some extent, even if there's economic retribution from the EU, that might be worth it in the end?
Well, I think what's worth it is to have the freedom that the rest of the United Kingdom of Great Britain enjoys and that we in Northern Ireland don't enjoy. So there's two things. There is, you rightly say, constitutional issue, but there is an economic factor to it as well. We need to have the shackles of the Northern Ireland Protocol removed so we can economically be the same as the rest of the United Kingdom. Maybe, just maybe, I hope this would be the case, that the EU would recognise that they must make a move in this. Even at this late stage, I think European politics tends to be one that moves at the last minute. Indeed, this is the last second of the last minute. But it's a constitutional issue. It's about freedom. It's about having the opportunities the rest of the United Kingdom have. And for us, it's so very important. The Prime Minister now recognises that. Liz Truss recognises that, and both are pursuing a clear method of action and a strategy. And I think every one of us in Northern Ireland as unionists recognise that and support those moves.
This has always struck me as an issue more of politics than anything else. All of the checks that were stipulated in the protocol haven't actually been implemented yet. Some of them have, but not all of them, and yet the sky hasn't fallen in. Would the EU really be that damaged if they had open access to UK markets and vice versa? Is that really that much of a threat to the integrity of the EU's market? Or can't the EU in this particular sense recognise the special status of Northern Ireland constitutionally as a matter of peace more than anything else, and say that in this area maybe they need to be a little bit more liberal with their border policies?
Well, I'm not sure, Tom, in fairness, that a little more liberal in their Northern Ireland policies might be enough to get it over the line. What we see and the strands that have been implemented within the Brexit agreement and within the Northern Ireland Protocol, they disadvantage firms in Northern Ireland. Look, Tom, in my constituency, genuinely and truthfully to you, there's been 99% of my companies and shops and businesses and those who employ people and create employment who have registered with me their opposition to the Northern Ireland Protocol on the grounds of how difficult it is making their business to continue. And indeed, there's some lines and products that they have been unable to purchase, but they can purchase them through the Republic of Ireland at a higher price. So everybody in Northern Ireland who's in a business is already disadvantaged financially. So we need to get back to the equality that we had before. So the EU really genuinely have to wake up, and they have to see that there is going to be a new reality here, perhaps. And we do hope that the Prime Minister and Liz Truss can push forward this legislative change if necessary, if the EU at the last minute don't recognise that the Northern Ireland Protocol isn't working, and basically do away with it.
Well, it'll be a fascinating issue to watch in not only the coming weeks, but the coming days, it seems. This is really starting to be quite a big bust-up again. But for now, DUP MP Jim Shannon, thank you so much for joining us this morning on The Briefing. Really appreciate your thoughts there. Well, one of the biggest issues that this government has to tackle is that of housing. And whilst some housing proposals under the former Housing Secretary were summarily defeated, voted down or indeed quashed out by Conservative MPs, they're having another go. New Housing Secretary Michael Gove has a housing reform agenda that was announced in the Queen's speech yesterday. And in it, the overriding value is trying to create development that communities themselves can support. Well, how is he going to go about doing that? It does sound like a little bit of a challenge. Let's talk through it now with GB News economics editor Liam Halligan. Liam, you have literally written the book on this issue. I
wasn't going to mention it.
On the issue of housing, government after government, minister after minister has failed to push through reform. Does Michael Gove have the chance now to be different?
I think Michael Gove's certainly breaking the mould in terms of his rhetoric. Look, you're right, Tom. For decades, we haven't built enough houses. That's one reason why the average house in the UK now costs almost 10 times average annual earnings. When I bought my first bit of property back in the mid-90s, it was a 3.5 times average earnings. It's a lot more unfair for your generation, frankly, Tom, than it has been for mine. And the Tories know that unless people can get on the property ladder, they're less likely to vote Tory when they get into their 30s and 40s and settle down and have families and so on. Michael Gove knows that his own backbenchers are absolutely incandescent at the idea of Whitehall-imposed housing plans on local authorities. They know if they keep doing that, particularly in the southeast, the so-called blue wall, but also in the southwest as well, in the northwest, in parts of the northeast, then the Lib Dems will come and eat their lunch. The Lib Dems, who are in many, many local constituencies against planning, very much talking about the environmental downsides of building more homes, even though people have to have somewhere to live. They challenge the Tories. So Michael Gove's done two things. The first thing is he's tried to pivot and say, look, what I really care about as a Conservative is social housing, people at the sharp end, more what we would call in old money council houses, subsidised rented accommodation that's owned and or managed by the state for lower income and more vulnerable households, because Tory and Labour policy over many years has been to build hardly any of those council houses. Michael Gove wants a council house revolution. He gave a very important speech at the think tank Shelter just a couple of weeks ago. Very unusual, very much a sort of left-wing campaigning charity, albeit one with a very distinguished history, Cathy Come Home and all the rest of it. For Michael Gove to turn up at Shelter and literally be applauded by some of Shelter's most sort of, established activists was a big deal.
Really interesting. But on the other hand, the proposals to not liberalise planning, but almost democratise planning with what's called street votes.
This is the other part of his pivot. The first one is the rhetoric away from top-down Whitehall-imposed plans on local authorities, and then pivoting to council houses and so on. But what he also wants to do is to try and use local democracy. Now, I've talked to Michael Gove about this extensively, as you know, and I think it's going to be very difficult for him to do unless at the sharp end, at the local level, local communities can see that if they go through the rigmarole, the upheaval, the disruption of more housing, because it takes time and there's no real upside for people already living there, unless along with the housing becomes more infrastructure. So you're going to get that new school, you're going to get that new hospital, you're going to get that bypass, you're going to get maybe a reduction in your council tax. And it's all about when land is given planning permission, the value goes up enormously. It's about sharing that planning gain. I've come up with proposals that I should say the government are looking at. Everyone in Whitehall knows that, about how to do that. But for the context of this conversation, I do think Michael Gove is minded to do it if he can, but it's a really tall order.
All about those incentives. And I know you'll be talking more about this issue on your programme at 1 p.m. today, On the Money with Liam Halligan. I'm looking forward to that.
Thanks, Tom.
Just after 1 p.m. So thanks for joining us this morning. Now, moving on to a further issue, because the Prime Minister is travelling to both Helsinki in Finland, but also Sweden today. Now, what is important about those two countries? Well, those two countries are very seriously considering joining the North Atlantic Treaty Organisation, NATO. Who better to discuss this visit now than Fabrice Pothier, from former NATO policy planner, who can join us on the briefing now. Welcome to the programme. What is the message that Boris Johnson will be taking to these two countries today, in your view?
I think, in my view, you will have a very simple message that is basically, we have your back, whilst you are entering the process of becoming a NATO member, and there's going to be an interim period between when you declare your intention and when you become a full-fledged member. And the UK, alongside the US, will provide firm security guarantees, so there is no gap and no doubt and no temptation for Vladimir Putin to do something during this interim period. So I think that's a very simple and important message.
And I suppose when we're talking about NATO, many people sitting at home watching or listening to this discussion might feel a little bit surprised that Sweden, for example, wasn't in NATO To start with, of course, Norway has been in NATO for many years. Why is it that particularly Sweden, but also Finland, haven't been in NATO up until this point?
Well, both countries, for different historic reasons, have maintained a kind of either some neutrality, like Finland, and some tradition of non-alignment for Sweden. But neutrality doesn't mean lack of defensive capabilities and lack of sovereignty, like in the case of Finland, where they have actually showed their willingness to fight. At the time it was the Soviet forces, and they have pretty substantial defense forces. So it's to say they have had this tradition, and I think it was sustainable up to a point, but it was clear after the first Russian war of aggression against Ukraine in 2014, 2015, that some kind of doubt started to creep in those two capitals as to whether this was really sustainable on the long term. And I think the war of the 24th of February kind of tipped the balance towards them joining the alliance, because now you cannot afford to have some doubt as to whether your EU partners or your NATO partners will be supporting you in case of crisis.
The United Kingdom has always seen itself as a bit of an Atlantic bridge, something that can sort of span the mindset of both Europe and the Americans. And to some extent, NATO is a fantastic example of that, the UK being one of the founding members of the organisation. Does the UK and the Prime Minister's visit today symbolise a desire within the United Kingdom to take a much more leading role in this organisation going forward?
I think one has to be mindful with the image of this kind of transatlantic bridge, which can become also a bridge to nowhere, quite frankly, and has been in recent periods. However, you're right that over the last few years, mostly also because of Brexit, the UK has put much more emphasis on its role inside the alliance. And it has also made a point of showing, yes, we are no longer part of the European Union, but we're still a European power to be reckoned with. Therefore, the UK's pretty important role on dealing with the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine by supplying weapons and providing political support. And therefore also the UK's role in providing those bilateral security guarantees to Finland and Sweden. So yes, indeed, this is the UK's hour, or the UK's way to kind of be this European power, even though it's no longer a part of the European Union, but to some limits. What the real limit is that nobody on the European continent is willing, I would say intuitively, to follow the UK leadership or political leadership on those issues. So the UK can act, and is acting, and is doing pretty good thing, but it doesn't mean the rest of Europe is following.
Really interesting stuff there. Fabrice Potier, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Pleasure.
Former NATO policy planner, of course. Thanks for joining us. Now, yesterday, of course, the government unveiled their legislative plans for the year ahead at the state opening of Parliament. The government unveiled 38 bills in the Queen's speech with aims to boost economic growth, deal with the cost of living crisis and establish stronger law and order. The headline measures have been well publicised, but what are the smaller elements that have been less reported? How are our lives going to change in those smaller ways? And what do they say about the potential direction of this government? Well, joining me now is Maxwell Marlowe, Development Officer and Researcher at the Adam Smith Institute. Welcome to the programme. I've been looking at some of these smaller elements in the Queen's speech, and I have to say I've been delighted by some of them. Could you talk us through some examples of the little tweaks that were announced yesterday?
Morning, Tom. So we have quite a few smaller little bits of policies being thrown in there, little treats for some of us think tanky neoliberals, including some that even you've spoken about, Tom, such as the hinting at allowing e-scooters to be allowed on pavements and for private ownership of those e-scooters, which is really good news. It's going to really excite the way in which we do transport in the UK, allowing people from all backgrounds to basically be liberated in how they get around their towns, cities and communities. That's really, really great, because currently you need to only rent them, and you need to have a license to do so. As if you walk around London, for example, there are loads of little renting areas you can just walk up, scan a electric scooter, and then off you go. But this is going to bring it really into personal property, and that's going to be really, really exciting. We also have a couple of other little things like scrapping bog-offs, buy one, get one free meals. That's going to be really important in dealing with the cost of living crisis, which is, as you've been speaking about already, really ephemeral.
Because on that issue, the government was extraordinarily, as part of its obesity strategy, going to ban shops from giving buy one, get one free offers. The most extraordinary policy. Having reversed that yesterday in the Queen's speech, does that tell us something about the direction of this government? Is this government going to become less nannying?
I really don't think so. I'm going to use a little example, for example. Scotch whisky, which is a beloved refreshment, I'll call it, of Britain. They noted in the Queen's speech yesterday, or at least the notes afterwards, that they're going to remove the tariff on Scotch whisky. Fantastic. The problem is, though, is that Scotch whisky and any spirit of any kind produced in the UK is taxed at £28 a litre. And the Treasury in no way is going to give us the liberty to drink our spirits at any less tax. So what we're seeing here is kind of a government it doesn't really know where to move next. These are ludicrous policies, like scrapping bog-offs. So it's good to see that reversal. And they are in crisis. They need to be seen to be doing something. But it doesn't mean they're going to be removing themselves from our lives like they should be.
One of the parts of our lives that they may be removing themselves from is something that really quite excites me. I'm not going to say it's the biggest reason that I supported Britain's exit from the European Union, but it certainly contributed to it. And I'm talking about those very irritating pop-up messages on websites saying accept cookies. Do you accept cookies for this website, whatever cookies are? I know not a single human being who has ever said no to that pop-up. Often those pop-ups just have one option, OK, and people mindlessly click through like drones, just taking away accumulative hours of our lives, probably over the course of our lives, just clicking a useless, annoying pop-up. Are those going to go too?
I think they are, and I can't wait to see the cookie crumble here. There are some estimates around how much GDPR, which is what caused this cost to fall on business and therefore on ourselves. It actually costs about 8% of profit for a lot of businesses, which is really quite large, especially if we're talking about going for growth and rebuilding the economy after COVID. And a lot of that should be around internet access and our access to the internet. So it's good to see the government's finally giving a little bit of freedom back to businesses to basically say, well, you can remove those cookies if you want, but that's going to be a more inverted decision. In many ways, like we do organ donation now, you're kind of accepted to, have permission to use cookies, and you can manually change those on websites later, which is a much better system. And as you said, it's going to save us cumulatively hours of our life rather than aimlessly and mindlessly clicking through on the website, which we know we're going to accept already.
Well, for me, just with that one policy change, Brexit has been worth it. We've broken free of that EU regulation. Although, when we're looking at the Queen's speech as a whole, just in our final minute of this conversation, Maxwell, is this a Queen's speech that moves Britain in a more liberalising direction, in a freer direction, or a more statist direction?
Oh, it's definitely more statist. As you said earlier, there are so many new bills being thrown on the table, despite us having so many bills going, potentially going through Parliament anyway. It's quite crazy, really. We have a lot of problems that need to be dealt with in the country, but this Queen's speech was bereft of ideas and bereft of what we need to solve the problems we're facing. This government is about value inflation, not growth at all, really. And that's a real problem for everyday people, you and me, listeners at home, and we need to fix that. But the government, it's not going to do it.
Well, it's a shame. Some small, good bits of policy in there, but the overall direction to you, Maxwell Marlowe, not good enough. Well, let's continue to unpick this as the days go on. I'm afraid we've run to the end of the programme today. Coming up, it's To The Point, but first, here's your weather.
Hello, a very good morning to you. I'm Aidan McGiven. Another day of sunny spells and showers for northern parts of the UK, but more prolonged rain is likely further south, although it's most likely to miss the far southeast where it will be drier and warmer. A couple of weather fronts to take note of. Low pressure to the north of Scotland, one weather front clearing the north of the UK, with another one becoming established across a large part of central and southwestern UK. So a wet day to come for the Midlands, into eastern England, Wales and the southwest. Some heavy rain at times, perhaps some tricky conditions